Welcome to Contact Centers as a Service, Challenges and Successes, our 37th web education event covering technical, business, and partner topics to help service providers and enterprises build better voice networks. Contact Centers as a Service opens a range of new opportunities for service providers, offering high-margin customer care applications and improved customer experience features to small and medium businesses. Service providers building or deploying a scalable and reliable CCaaS platform will surely face challenges. We know because we've seen the hurdles and are going to share some really innovative solutions. Stay with us as we talk with Jon Arnold, the principal at J Arnold Associates and a leading analyst covering the contact center market. We have lots to cover, so let's get going. All right, so let's move on to do some introductions here. I'm Alan Percy. I'm the CMO for TelcoBridges and host for today's event. And joining us is Jon Arnold. He is a highly respected analyst that covers the contact center industry, and he's been named to the top 10 contact centers influencers and has been cited among the top analysts covering the contact center industry. Beyond that, I call Jon a personal friend, and he's also a very talented musician. Jon joins us from his home office in Toronto, Canada. And Jon, thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Alan. Hey, we've been in this game a long time. So yes, the familiarity is really, really good because we don't have to explain a lot of stuff. We just kind of know. But on the other hand, we are getting to a space where, you know what, there are new trends, and that's what's important today. You know, as you say,
right.
You guys have been doing a great job with these, educationally focused webinars. So this is not, we're not asking you to sign a PO right or now, guys, but we do want you to understand what's happening. And that's why I'm here, right?
Yep, absolutely. No, I think your perspective is going to add a lot of value today. So, all right, quick look at our agenda. We're going to start, we obviously started with some introductions. Then we're going to move on and talk about trends in CCaaS and some drivers. And Jon's going to provide that content. And then I'll move on and talk about some of the implementation challenges. Then we'll move on to the case studies, and then we'll address your questions towards the end. So appreciate you all sticking with us and look forward to seeing your questions and comments. All right, so let's move on. Jon, first, why don't we start with just give us a little background about your business, and then we'll move on to your slides.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Alan. So I'm an independent technology analyst, and I've been in that mode about 15 years, I'd say. I worked formerly for Frost & Sullivan, so I've come out of the analyst space, and have been following primarily voice from the early days when VoIP was just starting out. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, TelcoBridges is one of those companies that's been in this space a long time. They know how to do voice, and that's really important because we take it for granted that this stuff's easy to do. But people like me and Alan, who've been here from the beginning of VoIP, know it's not that easy. And so as an analyst, I have followed that technology quite closely. And as things evolve, now my focus has moved on to unified communications, which includes voice, excuse me. And from there, contact center has increasingly become kind of on the radar of anything to do with collaboration technologies. Those spaces, UC, contact center, have a lot of overlap. So I'm one of those analysts who's pretty firmly planted in both markets. And the contact center space is where a lot of the action is happening right now with innovation. There's so much at stake. Keeping customers happy, expectations changing with digital customers. So technology has a really central role to play. I mean, VoIP is pretty mature, right, Alan? It's kind of baked by now, but contact center is still a little late to the game with a lot of these technologies. So that's why we're doing educational webinars. And so there's a lot to talk about. There is. And as a matter of fact, let's get going here. All right. So I'll let you take it from here. Sure. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, everybody, CCaaS or CCaaS, as we call it, contact center as a service, right? So this is the new model that a lot of players are following. And what's great about this space, and Alan, you guys know firsthand, this has become a really demand-driven market. So as you see here in this slide, contact centers are ready for the cloud. The pandemic we've all came through last year and are still living it has been a really big test for the cloud. And I think it's held up really well. So a lot of people have had reservations about cloud, but as you can see, this is fairly recent research from Contact Babel that it's pretty good. As you see, on average, 52% of contact centers are using some degree of cloud for contact center. So it's not like this is something you've got to start from scratch, you know nothing about. You know, we've been using cloud in businesses for so many other things. CRM is a great example of that. This is not new, but it's fairly new for the contact center. And you can see here with some verticals, look at how high it is for outsourcing, medical, 60%, 72%. So this is not, we're starting at ground zero here. It's already in play in the market. So different verticals, of course, have different levels of take-up. That's to be expected. But this is a good kind of starting point, Alan, for the story here that cloud's ready. It's ready for you. And we want to tell you that you should be ready for cloud now. Okay, we got another data set to show. This is from Twilio, a company you not normally associate with contact center, but they come to market with a kind of a different approach to it, but it has a place with this cloud market now. They published an annual report that's pretty extensive, and this is a very simple data set that's worth sharing from that study because it's industry-based, right? And it's showing that the pandemic has not just made cloud okay to use, it's accelerated plans. So look at some of these numbers here. Cloud migration accelerated across companies, especially from the 500 and up. 92% report COVID-19 related acceleration of that move. Similarly here, the second circle here, 95% say they plan to increase or maintain current channel offerings after the pandemic. So not only are they accelerating plans to the cloud, but it's not just an experiment that they'll try it and see if they're going to stick with it. No, they're sticking with it because they find once cloud deployments have happened that it's working, it's holding up, it's not, the roadblocks that they might have thought were there aren't. And that's the good news because once they're comfortable with cloud, now they can settle on that as a platform. Now you can add and expand new pieces to it. So that's kind of the recipe here. You can try it. You can go back if you want, but as you can see, most people stay with it. I think that's an important takeaway here, Alan.
Okay, good. It's good to hear.
Yeah, there's definitely a good story. So let's talk a bit about adoption trends. Why would you go to the cloud? And what are the forms? So the first is this idea of hybrid. And hybrid adoption means that you're taking a piecemeal approach to the cloud. So most contact centers remain fully premise-based. Some have a bit of a mix. But when you go to cloud, you take the hybrid approach, seems to be the most effective way to go. It's the lowest risk and gives you the best of both worlds, where you keep the really complicated stuff on-prem. Most contact centers have some types of integrations that are complicated, legacy-based, wired, hard-boiled. They're not going to change that easily. You can keep that, but there's lots of room to play to try new things that are cloud-based with very little risk. So you kind of start the slow migration to go that way. So that's an important trend. Not that many go straight to cloud, put it that way. So that means, of course, that IT is adopting cloud on this kind of what I would call a safe scale. So you start small, build trust. As you saw from that earlier slide, 95% are staying with the cloud once they go. Build that trust, let it show you what it can do, and then add pieces as you go. So regardless of where you are right now, don't let cloud be a driver to stay where you are. Rather, you can take it at your own pace with very little risk. And generally speaking, a little bit of risk will show you it stays, it works, you keep with it. So on that note, more specifically, chatbots and AI are an important trend with contact center these days. In terms of a trend for adoption, I'd say contact centers are generally adopting pretty cautiously. So you can get excited about AI, and you should, but don't expect it to change the world overnight. So you start simple. Let it focus on some basic self-service tasks that you can automate easily. Then that keeps you in a good space to say, okay, don't set the bar too high. You'll get there, but this is an iterative technology. So it doesn't get perfect right away, but it does get there over time. And that's the important thing to keep in mind. Okay, got a couple more trends, Alan, here to speak to. Okay, contact center is the logical starting point. So what I mean by that is that what we're finding today is that customer service as a concept isn't restricted to the physical place we call the contact center. Customers now are finding new ways to interact with companies that don't necessarily flow through the contact center. They will make their inquiries as a result of marketing campaigns, sales programs, interactions with technical support. None of these really involve the contact center or need to. So you should be thinking about cloud. It's a flexible platform. It's a very opportunistic model to approach. It doesn't have to be just about your contact center. There's other ways you can deploy these technologies and get pretty good value. So that's the trend here, that businesses are seeing that there's more to customer service now than just being what happens in the contact center. Also, buyers are open to considering new vendors, new technologies, and new solutions. That's really important because in the prem-based model, we kind of know who the players are. They've been there forever, tried and true, familiar, et cetera, et cetera. They can all do the job, but cloud opens the door, the barriers to entry change, and now we're getting lots of players who are cloud native coming into the contact center space. They may not be solving every problem of the contact center, but they bring new solutions and new technologies. And if you've been sticking with a prem-based contact center vendor forever, there is a bigger world out there. That's the main message here. So for adoption trends, you should be open-minded about what's out there on the market. Also, contact center leaders, they want cloud. They recognize now it's happening all around them, but they don't know how to get there. And that's why these educational webinars are so important, because you got to build a bit of a knowledge base. You've got to speak about what's happening in the broader industry and say, hey, this works in my world too. So that's why we're here today, to help tell you a little bit about this, that there are paths to get to the cloud. They're not as overwhelming or risky as you might think. Okay, so then we got another set of talking points, Alan, about the drivers, right? Why is this space growing? Why? You could stick with prem-based and never make a change, and some companies will still do that. However, as you get further along to today's needs, you'll find there's a lot of inherent limitations from using these contact center technologies. They're very good at what they were designed for, no question about it, but the world has changed now. We don't live in a telephony-centric world where most of the contact center volume comes in over the phone. It still does, but it's not the only channel, and that mix is changing for sure. So there's got to be a better way to adapt to these changing needs, and that's where the cloud comes in. Similarly, for your customers, if they are expecting levels of service that you can't provide, sooner or later, that's going to translate into reduced customer SAT scores, reduced NPS scores, Net Promoter Scores, and also declining CX. In other words, if your customer experience that you're delivering to your customers is getting weaker, it's declining, it's not what it used to be, those are clues that you're not meeting their expectations. Now it becomes a business issue. It's not just a contact center issue. When the top line starts to suffer, when customer retention starts to decline, these are all signs that the contact center isn't doing the job it needs to do. That opens the door for, say, where are we going to get the new stuff from? That's where the cloud is the answer. Also, growing need for both multi-channel and omni-channel capabilities. Again, that telephony-centric world we grew up with, where most inquiries come over the phone, or maybe even all of them, or email, or fax, the legacy tools, that is no longer the center of where customer service happens. So to be agile today in a in a contact center environment, you got to support multi-channel, meaning beyond just those tools. and also omni-channel, which is the ability to have the same experience no matter what tools the customer is using and being able to support those tools. That's a bigger story, but that's part of what's needed today. And again, this is where contact center in the cloud really brings in this kind of pan enterprise capability where you draw from all sources. In other words, you get away from this silo world where voice lives here, CRM lives here. That's a really difficult model to scale in this environment. But CCaaS, that's the way forward to do these things. All right, Alan, I think there's one more slide, a few more growth drivers. So WFH, if you don't know, that's work from home, right? This has become kind of the norm. It's here to stay. We all know what it means, right? But contact centers in particular really had to shift fast when this came up last year with pandemic, right? How do you support agents working from home? What we're really talking about here, of course, is a distributed model. How do you have all of these agents in different places getting real-time capabilities to support customers? Again, this is where the cloud is really the way to go. You don't have to put dedicated trunks. You don't have to put dedicated service, standalone phones in everybody's home. That's too costly, too complicated. When it's distributed over the web, now you've got a model that's scalable and agile enough to change. Now you can add agents as you go, busy season, peaks and valleys, et cetera. You can up and down scale very easily. That makes work from home a really good model. You've also got, again, pandemic related, right, guys? Rising call volumes. Customers have been more anxious since the pandemic started, calling for all kinds of ridiculous things about what are your hours of operation? How do I return something? All these routine things, but that translates into a higher volume that you can't support very well. You can't just hire more agents to handle it, not an economical option at all. So that means as a growth driver, you got to be thinking about how do I reduce costs? How do I automate things so I can handle those higher volumes without that expense of hiring more agents? Well, again, CCaaS is the way to do that. And finally, the SaaS model, right? Software as a service. You've been using Salesforce forever. You know how this works. Most businesses have moved to SaaS for various ways. It's now finding its way into the contact center, right? It's kind of established now as the best way, not just to deploy new technology, because you've got to do it quickly. You can't build it from scratch. You can't rely on prem-based tools all the time, but also to finance it, right? This brings it into that OpEx model, not CapEx. Now you don't have to get those capital budgets in place to get the technology you need. That's one of the real strong points about SaaS model. And that to me is one of the biggest drivers of all for CCaaS. So Alan, I think that'll set the stage pretty well to kind of tell a story about deployment challenges and how you overcome them.
That's great. No, it's fantastic. What you shared lines up with a lot of our experiences too. So I wanted to move on and start to talk about some of the implementation challenges that we've heard directly from customers over the years as we started to put session border controllers and media gateways in the contact centers as it came along. So what we did is we put together a collection of our top 7 implementation challenges for CCaaS infrastructure, kind of like building blocks as part of a solution. And the number one, I think Jon just mentioned, is a subscription-based business model. This is key for a lot of, especially newer entries into the contact center space. As you start to build your contact center as a service, you can't have a lot of fixed costs. The minimum number of fixed costs, if everything can be based on a subscription that grows with you, that helps your business model and allows you to scale up as time goes on and as you build additional subscribers on your network. So this is a critical first piece. The second was choosing cloud native platforms. One of the challenges with the cloud is that there are vendors who had premise-based systems, and when the time came to move to the cloud, it was a struggle for them to move to cloud native environments. And the side effect of that was this big, clunky, inefficient software that was never designed for the cloud, that was kind of jammed in like a square peg in a round hole in the cloud environments. And so we've noticed and have taken recognition of that building software that's designed for the cloud from the ground up is very, very important. across the board. Next, of course, is interoperability, being able to work with other either older systems or, as John mentions, hybrid environments where you've got some pieces of the old and some parts of the new, or maybe it's multiple service providers you want to work with, or multiple desktop phones, or maybe screen clients. These kinds of interoperability, compatibility is really important to build these new solutions. A fourth one is performance. As the contact center begins to grow, the software needs to be efficient. The cloud does really well at delivering good compute platforms. But if the software is clunky or slow, you'll end up spending too much money on the compute platforms, because every processor you rent has a fixed cost with it, and every byte that gets transferred has a fixed cost with it in a cloud environment. So having high performance software solutions reduces your operating costs and improves the quality of the service that's delivered to the customers. Our number 5 is voice quality. No one wants to have a contact center agent that's hard to understand, voice dropouts, echo, these kinds of things, especially if you're using an international agent, as part of your team. So voice quality is critically important, and to be able to support not only high reliability with G711, but also supporting things like G722, wideband codecs, et cetera, can improve the voice quality significantly. Number 6 is, demonstrated high reliability. You want software that is shown to be highly reliable. It's the last thing you need is have outages or downtime, or have to have a lot of redundancy in your infrastructure. So high reliability fits along with delivering a good quality product. And last but not least is having access to support for 24/7. So, the contact centers live and breathe 24/7. It's not uncommon for people in the evening try to diagnose something or want to buy something. Basically the world doesn't sleep anymore, and having access to support around the clock is critical. So these are our top 7 that we've found of our software infrastructure requirements, our building blocks. And let's move on to, we brought a couple of case studies. They're very different case studies, but they're stories about customers of TelcoBridges who have built contact centers in a very unique or very interesting and different way. And the first one I'm going to start with is Aircall. They're a French-based company. They've got significant presence in Paris and also in New York City. And they started out offering a fully cloud-based phone system for businesses. That was really, the idea was to deliver a phone system that worked really well in business environments. And as part of that, they added on contact center features. The idea of being able to route calls and be able to manage the call traffic, inbound call traffic or outbound call traffic to the appropriate either salesperson or agent or whatever you want to call it. It is based on WebRTC on the client side, and it integrates uniquely with many of the major CRMs, including Salesforce, Zendesk, a big long list of them beyond that, with all the contact center or call center features. And one of the elements as part of it is some really rich analytics. And the analytics is not only a part of how the call handling happens, but is also about the network infrastructure that builds this. And they felt, talking to the principals there, that the voice quality is very, very important. And they want to be able to measure that as time went on, to be able to make sure that the carriers that they chose are meeting their service level agreements. So some of the challenges they had was moving on and expanding into international markets. And now they needed to interface with SIP trunks in those domestic markets. Right, so if they were expanding, I think one of the big ones was into Singapore, for example. They needed to work with operators from Singapore and be able to support the SIP trunks from those providers. And they needed an SBC that could normalize this traffic and bring it into their network that was AWS based. And as I mentioned before, they wanted to do voice quality monitoring and have a subscription business model, which this was a perfect fit for our ProSBC solution. So we've deployed with them ProSBC in each one of the AWS geographic zones that they work in. which is a continually growing list. And we're able to provide optional APIs that allow them to provision, monitor, and manage this SBC remotely in an automated mechanism. And some of the other more esoteric features is they're able to use what we call media bypass. And what this does is it reduces some of the data charges that happen on AWS and improves efficiency, along with that voice quality monitoring and reporting. And of course, we offer this to them on a subscription license model. And this has fit their business model quite well. And of course, if you follow AirCall, you see they've on a tremendous growth path. And we congratulate them on that. And we're just thrilled to be part of the infrastructure that's helped made that happen. So that's our friends at AirCall. Moving on to something very different is a customer of ours called Assist, with 2 T's. They're based in Turkey and a wholly owned subsidiary of Turk Telecom. And they've been hosting a contact center solution for some major companies. In the beginning, it was kind of on-premise service, and they wanted to be able to move to more of a cloud-based service that allowed agents to work in remote locations and separate data centers, cloud-based data centers. One of the key differences, though, is that they wanted to be able to continue to offer their customers both Avaya and Genesys Contact Center as a service. So instead of putting an Avaya or Genesys Contact Center at the end customer site, they would host all this and provide those services. And of course, this is all done in the private cloud. So some of the challenges they had was, integrating into both this Avaya and Genesys environment with the Turk Telecom SIP trunks, and also providing support for both TDM and SIP trunks. So they needed to be able to still support TDM trunks. And this was one of the requirements of one of their, I think, financial industry customers. And do all the traffic management and routing, making sure that the right call gets to the right application, and eventually on to the right agent. And one of the unique things is they had very high calls per second from high-speed dialers. They make a significant number of outbound calls as part of some of the contact center features. And their dialers generate, tens of thousands of calls a day, and be able to handle that high calls per second rate was important. And of course, they wanted a high availability solution that if one of the SBCs or platforms were to fail, they could do a switchover. So what they chose is to deploy a mix of our Pro SBC and our TMG media gateways, as shown in the diagram here on the right, landing both SIP trunks and TDM trunks, bringing them into their cloud-based data center, which they have got 3 of, and using our high availability 1+1 licenses, both on the gateway and the SBC, to manage all this call routing and directing calls onto the contact center and eventually onto the agents. The SBC, one of its key functions is to protect the contact center from distributed denial of service attacks. And they're concerned about network scanning. They wanted to make sure that none of that got into their network. Again, they've got some very sensitive financial services customers, and it was important for them to protect it. And one of the last but not least is they are using our TB Analytics suite to monitor the network performance and also watch the voice performance on the network to make sure that they're meeting their customer needs. And we've got this case study published on the FreeSBC website, and you can take a look at that under the contact center menu. So those are a couple of contact center examples of some of the things that we've been able to build with our partners and our customers, and hopefully we can do something like that for most others. So where to learn more about some of this is one of the best resources we've got is our video library, which is hosted on YouTube. We got all kinds of resources from training modules to recorded webinars. Our past 36 webinars are all up there. A whole slew of how-to tutorials, some customer interviews, including there's an AirCall interview that we did with Pierre Baptiste that's available to view. some, quite a few frequently asked questions and recorded podcasts and much, much more. And we encourage you to, visit youtube.com/TelcoBridges. And while there, of course, you subscribe and the usual function. So with that, John, I'm going to ask you to step in again here. It looks like we've got at least a question to get started. I want to remind everyone, if you've got a question or you've got a comment, maybe you want to share it with John and myself, go ahead, go to the Q&A panel and submit your question, and we can go from there. All right, so let's talk. Let's see. Kevin provided a question here, and he asks, as the agents went home last year because of COVID, what issues did you see with the remote staff, bandwidth, VPNs? What are you seeing in the businesses and return to the office? And John, I'm gonna let you take a first pass at that question.
Okay. Yeah, Alan, by the way, those case studies were great. I've also been following AirCall and like what they're doing. I mentioned earlier, about we take it for granted that telephony is so easy to do, but we know it's not. And this is a company that's kind of best of breed about voice, right? And they know how important it is. And especially for CCaaS, when you just assume it's going to be real easy, you know what, you got to think it through a little more. And that's where why they're having success, right?
That's right.
Sure.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So for Kevin's question, certainly the idea of all of a sudden overnight, you got all these people working from home. VPN would be great, but it's not a practical solution. It's not meant for scale like that. It was always more an exception basis, not for everybody. So that's not a good approach to do that. And I guess maybe if you have, again, MPLS would maybe help support some of that. But those are expensive options here. And it's really more about the bandwidth requirements. And this is where contact centers have run into some challenges because not every agent works in a home environment that's, what they had in the contact center. So if the crowded apartments, sharing broadband with everybody in the house, doing streaming and stuff, it's not ideal. So in those kind of cases, the takeaway is you've got to be prepared if you're going to support those agents on an ongoing basis, that they're going to have a richer broadband capability. And there are issues at the edges where people are relying on Wi-Fi. They're in areas that don't have good broadband access, period. There's going to be some issues there for sure. You're just going to have to roll with. So this is going to kind of shake out in time and say, hey, for those people, if they really want it to stay in the game badly enough, they're either going to have to find a way or come back to the contact center when it's safe to do so.
Right. So
that's at, the RTO, the return to office side of your question here, Kevin, is saying, well, as I said, you've got to, there's two things, Alan, I'll stop because this is where the SBC actually comes in. You've got to have enough broadband just to support real-time communication. But then there's also the issues of security, right? When you're dealing with, PCI, credit card issues, sensitive customer data, you've got to make sure that, hey, they don't want to be running over an exposed network where there's security risks. You don't know if they're at home or at a Starbucks or someplace else doing this work. So you've got to be mindful that they're out of your day-to-day purview. You've got to think through a little more than just broadband capability if you're going to keep them at home.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Fortunately, from the contact center space, there was a push to bring a lot of the contact centers back to domestically from, there was a stretch there in the beginning when it was all about offshoring, right? Sending all the contact center jobs overseas. And that didn't work out so well. I think what a lot of folks figured out, a lot of the contact center managers figured out, is that they were error prone, the performance issues, the training was a problem. So they started bringing some of those jobs back home, and we started calling it home shoring, right? Which is, the people working from their den or for their basement, or, having flexible, almost gig kind of contract hour type work from home environment. And that was probably 3-4 years ago that was starting to take place. I don't know, Johnny, you remember those days?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. But again, it's another indication, by the way, of two things. Digital transformation. We just have more ways to contact, and globalization, which also the cloud enables, right? To have 24/7 global businesses. All of a sudden, you got to be running around the clock, and that pushes you into the need for AI and automation, because those levels of service are impossible just to man manually. It's just too expensive.
That's right. So the second part of that was, now that they've built a little bit of a experience from this work from home. Some of the contact centers have built a little bit of experience. So the technology that they're using to help make that happen is either instead of using VPN, because as you mentioned, VPN doesn't scale to, if you've got 1,000 agents, you can't have a VPN that's got 1,000 remotes. And so that's using, encrypted SIP, encrypted media with SRTP to the remote agent, and the agent, and then having a soft client that knows how to work in an encrypted environment. And the session border controller at the access side of the contact center is fairly common. And we've got a couple other projects we've done that with customers, and that allows a SIP session to the agent, and then that's encrypted, and that provides the security and doesn't require all the VPN equipment, and works across a pretty wide range of IP connectivity quality. For the work from home, as you mentioned, not everybody can have 100 megabit per second internet connectivity, but a reasonable couple hundred megabits per second is way more than they would. A couple hundred kilobits per second is plenty to provide it, to cover that kind of traffic. So that's typically how they've been doing it. WebRTC, which is what AirCall is doing to the agent, is another method that we are seeing occur more often, and that also provides a mechanism. So hopefully, Kevin, we've answered your question. So good. Well, John, looks like we've exhausted our list of questions here. First, I want to thank you, John, for spending the time to work with us on this project. Your expertise and knowledge in the industry has been a big help, so thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Yep.
We're here to educate.
Yes, very much. And I want to thank all our participants today listening in. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending out an email with a link to the recording and also to the slides. And if you want to share that with your friends and coworkers, that would be a great way to pass it along. So with that, we're going to say have a great day, and that's it from here.